Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm bringing the African experience, I'm trying to share with you. Hopefully, this will be transferred to other countries across the world. As you know, in last year, 2010, Tunisia and Kenya became the first African states to prohibit corporal punishment of children in all settings, including in the home. So in my presentation, briefly I'm going to explain what happened, the background, what led to the law reform, what were the key steps, and also talk about the key learnings and how we can use it further across the world. I will start with Tunisia because Tunisia was the first state, in fact, to start to engage into the law reform. It started with the law of 26th of July 2010, which amended Article 319 of the Penal Code. Prior to that reform, Article 319 authorized the correction, corporal punishment of inflicted to children by parents and caregivers. So there was a specific clause which allowed parents to inflict correction to children, and then that made corporal punishment in the home not punishable. So with the law reform, that particular clause was removed. It made that, so the outcome was that corporal punishment was definitely prohibited in all settings, including in the home. Before that law reform, corporal punishment was lawful in the home, in school, and alternative settings. So now, following that law reform, we had full prohibition of corporal punishment of children in Tunisia. Then, when the law was published in the Gazette, the Tunisian Constitutional Council confirmed that it was in conformity with the Constitution, and then corporal punishment had then become a criminal offense. So what led to the law reform? What were the key steps? We had, for example, to start with, in 1995, there was a child protection code in Tunisia. It was then developed. On that same year, in 1995 again, during the initial examination of the State Party report of Tunisia, the Committee on the Right of the Child made a recommendation regarding corporal punishment of children in Tunisia. The committee then recommended that Tunisia developed some measures, educational measures for parents to make sure that corporal punishment wasn't inflicted in all settings in Tunisia. In 2002, again, for another examination of the State Party report of Tunisia by the Committee on the Right of the Child, this time, the committee made a specific recommendation asking for law reform in Tunisia for the prohibition of corporal punishment of children. Then in December 2009, the Tunisian government decided to develop a national program on violence against children. This was done in partnership with UNICEF. It was a 3-year program, and then all stakeholders' views were taken into account. Children's views were taken into account, for example, through the Children's Parliament, and psychological as well as corporal ill treatment. They did not really mention punishment, but ill treatment was highlighted as a key issue that needed to be addressed. And then civil society organizations were also involved in the development of this particular national program on violence against children. Then we moved to 2010, May 2010. A bill was submitted at cabinet during a cabinet minister meeting. This was chaired by the head of state, And then it's during that cabinet meeting that it was that bill mentioned the amendment of Article 319 of the Penal Code, which the target was to prohibit corporal punishment of children in all settings. During the latest examination of a state party report of Tunisia by the Committee on the Right of the Child in June 2010, the representative of the government of Tunisia confirmed that the state, the government, and the head of state, in fact, wanted to prohibit corporal punishment in all settings through law reform. So it was made official by them. And then, in July 2010, the law was passed by the parliament. So you will notice that between December 2009 and July 2010, in less than a year, the law reform happened. It was suggested, the president wanted it, the cabinet, the government endorsed it, and it was passed by the parliament. So it was very fast. So what led, what were the motivation, the official motivation, in fact? Why did we have this law reform, and what did it happen so fast? According to the government, because in fact it was a governmental initiative, according to the government, it was because of the global economical and financial crisis. They felt that children should not be victims of this crisis, so they had to develop and implement child-friendly policies and laws. And they felt that corporal punishment, the prohibition of corporal punishment, was also a way of smoothing, I would say, soothing the global economical and financial crisis. That's one of the arguments, official argument coming from the government. Second argument, it was that because they'd been, state party report had been examined 3 times by the Committee on the Right of the Child, and any time they were going before the committee, the issue of law reform and corporal punishment was raised, they felt that it was time to meet the requirement, and so they decided to engage into law reform. So apparently the Committee on the Right of the Child was instrumental to the law reform. And also, the issue of corporal punishment wasn't addressed in isolation. There were also other bills, child-friendly bills, which were discussed. So it was a holistic approach about guaranteeing the well-being of the child in Tunisia. In terms of challenges, obviously there were no challenges. It was Tunisia before January 2011, so if the government suggests, obviously, it was going to be endorsed, and moreover, it was a very progressive initiative. So CSOs, civil society organizations, were in full support. At least that's before the law reform itself. Now I'm going to talk about Kenya briefly, and then I will highlight the challenges that we may have concerning Tunisia as well as Kenya. In Kenya, the context is completely different. In Kenya, before and after, in fact, after the post-electoral violence, it was felt that they needed a new constitution, that a constitutional reform should take place. It did take place, and then a constitution was promulgated in August 2010. Very comprehensive constitution, progressive. There's even a specific section on children, about children, protection of children, their well-being, and there's a section, Article 29, states that every person has the right not to be subjected to corporal punishment. This is the constitutional reform which affects the use of corporal punishment of children in all settings, because then it becomes a constitutional right for children not to be subjected to corporal punishment. That particular article states every person. This includes children. So de facto, children are protected against corporal punishment in Kenya. Situation in Kenya is slightly different, because in Kenya there are existing laws which currently authorize the use of corporal punishment, for example, in alternative care settings. So these laws will need to be repealed. This is not the case in Tunisia, because in Tunisia, the law reform was very specific. It removed a particular clause. The intention was very clear. It wasn't a random move. In Kenya, it's a constitutional reform, and there are existing laws. Equally, the constitution in Kenya says that all laws which are in breach with the constitution should be repealed. The constitution is binding, it should prevail. So there are further work to do in terms of for repealing those existing laws. The context also in Kenya was slightly different. Civil society was very active prior to the constitutional reform. Organizations such as AMCAN, which is the African Network for the Prevention and Protection Against Child Abuse and Neglect in Kenya, Save the Children Sweden, and a lot more civil society organizations had done tremendous work on the corporal punishment, campaigning for law reform and promoting positive discipline. This was prior to the constitutional reform. Lots of work has been done in terms of media, training, education, program on the radio, newspapers, research. AMCAN, for example, had developed a specific campaign on the 30th of April. They started that in 2005. In 2007, they called this particular activity the No Kiboko Day, which means, it's in Swahili, which means no hitting day. And then during that day, they have campaign around the promotion of positive discipline. And this was done with, in partnership with the Ministry of Education. So there's a vibrant advocacy work in Kenya. It wasn't like that in Tunisia. Kenya was already part of a very strong campaign against corporal punishment for law reform and for promoting positive discipline. So seeing Tunisia and Kenya, different context, different approach, what are the challenges? What can we see as challenges in those countries, but also in Africa? First of all, we have prohibition, we have the law, but we need elimination. We have to have educational activities. We had that in Kenya, obviously, but we didn't have that in Tunisia. We need more work. And this is where the promotion of positive discipline comes on board and becomes more important. We need to raise awareness about the law itself, about alternative of discipline methods. There's also specific context to Africa, maybe not only Africa anyway. Religion, culture, these aspects also can slow down the implementation of the law